It doesn't matter where you are, there's no escape from clueless people. Some idiots just can't resist pushing their luck, especially when it comes to the Royal Guard. These guards, trained with discipline and precision, seem to attract troublemakers like moths to a flame. But here's the thing. The Royal Guard knows exactly how to deal with these kinds of geniuses, and they've gone viral on the internet with jaw-dropping videos of these idiots where they get what they deserve. And that's exactly what you'll see today, so buckle up and get ready to laugh your head off. A horse's bite. Among the royal guards at Buckingham Palace, the mounted guards on their imposing horses are a true spectacle. But don't be fooled. While they're well trained, these cavalry horses are still unpredictable. In fact, there's a huge sign right next to them warning tourists to keep their distance, as the horses might kick or even bite. Yet, as usual, tourists can't resist pushing their luck. Throughout the day, curious passers-by ignore the warning, inching dangerously close and stressing these powerful animals. On this day, one horse had clearly had enough. A tourist got a bit too close and the horse snapped, grabbing her clothes in its teeth and leaving her visibly shaken. But the lesson didn't end there. Moments later, another woman approached the same horse for a photo, stubbornly ignoring its warnings as it lunged at her. Before she knew it, the horse had dragged her like a rag doll, her hat tumbling to the ground. She shouldn't have been surprised. There were warnings everywhere. But as they say, some lessons are learned the hard way. The Blue Protesters. In another incident, some protesters attempted to raise awareness about the overuse of social media and internet apps. Their signs encouraged people to focus on their real lives instead of spending excessive time online. Dressed in attention-grabbing outfits, they protested right next to a Royal Guard's horse, which started to become anxious. Given the unusual sight of people covering their faces, it's understandable why the horse got spooked. The protesters certainly caught attention, especially from the horse. Its rider had to warn them to back away from the animal. Handsome guard. At England's iconic palace, a couple of tourists were recording a selfie with a royal guard standing stoically in the background. The groom couldn't help but notice the guard's striking looks, commenting on how handsome and stylish he looked in his royal uniform. The bride, sensing where this was heading, already looked embarrassed, but her husband was just getting started. He edged closer to the guard, pointing right at him and repeating, "You're handsome," as if trying to make the guard laugh or break his focus, something they're trained never to do. The groom kept up his antics, edging closer with every joke until he was practically face-to-face with the guard. Then, he went a step too far, shouting about the guard being too handsome. That did it. The guard snapped back, firmly telling him to step back. Startled, the groom quickly backed off, shutting off the recording in pure shock. It was probably a reaction he hadn't bargained for. Pointing the gun, a group of Russian tourists found themselves on thin ice at Buckingham Palace's garden in England, where they managed to anger a royal guard. The video doesn't show exactly what the tourists were up to, only the guard is in view, but you can clearly hear him shouting for them to step back from the fence, likely a restricted area. The guard's voice was commanding as he gave multiple warnings, even stomping his boots in a firm display of authority. But the message didn't seem to sink in. By the third warning, it was clear the tourists hadn't taken him seriously, so the guard took it up a notch. In a shocking turn, he pulled out his rifle, pointing it directly at the group to get his point across. Incredibly, you can still hear the tourists laughing, blissfully unaware of the danger staring them down. Luckily, he didn't need to fire, or that laugh would have quickly turned to sheer terror. Not so funny jokes. Some tourists go to ridiculous lengths just to mess with the royal guards, and this guy was no exception. Hoping to get a reaction, he started making exaggerated faces and gestures at the camera, posing in bizarre and borderline disrespectful ways. He was clearly enjoying himself, but the guard? Not so much. At one point, you can even hear a local commenting that the tourist was mocking the guard. Realizing this wasn't going to stop anytime soon, the guard eventually stepped away, choosing to remove himself from the scene. But not long after, a military police officer arrived to deal with the situation. Though he couldn't completely stifle a chuckle, he still told the Joker to cut it out. Luckily, the tourist took the hint because the guard returned shortly after, clearly not in a laughing mood. Hitting the guard with Snack's life as a royal guard, especially when surrounded by tourists, isn't exactly a walk in the park. Some visitors treat them like exhibits in a zoo, snapping photos, trying to touch them, and occasionally crossing the line. Their role, though, is vital to England and the UK, demanding discipline even on tough days. This particular guard was already having a rough time. After ordering a group of tourists to clear his path, he approached another mounted guard near Buckingham Palace's main gates, only to encounter trouble with a woman standing too close to the horse. It seemed he politely asked her to give them some space. She moved back a bit, but not enough, so he circled the horse to speak to his fellow guard. Then came the shocker. On his way back, he requested her to step aside again, and unbelievably, she hit him with a can of snacks. The crowd in front of the palace was stunned. Despite the clear insult, the royal guard stayed composed, choosing to ignore her outrageous behavior. But the police didn't let it slide. They quickly intervened to have a serious word with her. It wouldn't be surprising if she ended up facing arrest for her actions. Blocking the way. When the royal guards are on patrol, they don't stop for anyone and certainly don't alter their route. They walk straight to their destination. Knowing a bit about local customs is always wise when visiting a new country, but some tourists overlook this, often landing themselves in trouble. That's exactly what happened here. The guard was patrolling as usual when he came across a tourist standing directly in his path. He had to pause, seemingly trying to communicate with the tourist, who looked completely clueless about what was going on. In a surprising move, rather than calling out for the tourist to clear the way, the guard chose to step aside and take a different path, a rare choice in situations like this. Afterward, a police officer approached the guard, possibly checking in on what had gone wrong. The guard's unexpected change in route likely went against protocol, putting his role in a tricky spot, all thanks to a tourist who had no idea of the trouble he caused. And there's no doubt he's now regretting that clueless blunder. Make way. While visiting England, a tourist spotted some royal guards on patrol and decided to film them, perhaps hoping for something out of the ordinary. When on duty, these guards don't stop for anyone, except of course for members of the royal family, who are unlikely to be casually strolling around unescorted. Just then, an oblivious couple found themselves right in the guards' path, prompting a loud, "Make way!" from the guards. Thankfully, the couple heard the warning in time and quickly stepped aside, narrowly avoiding being mowed down. The man filming could be heard chuckling at their awkward scramble, but this incident serves as a vital reminder. In England, you'd better stay alert to avoid looking foolish in a moment like this. Messing with the helmet. The Royal Guard's uniforms are undeniably striking. Some wear helmets topped with a red feather, while others sport the iconic bearskin hat. No matter the uniform, tourists in England flock to snap a photo with these guards as a treasured souvenir. One afternoon, a royal guard, dressed in his feathered helmet and armed with a saber, stood stationed outside Buckingham Palace, dutifully posing for photos as tourists lined up. But the photo op came to an abrupt end when a bold tourist couldn't resist temptation and reached out to touch the guard's feathers. After a man had taken his photo and moved on, she lingered, assuming the guard wouldn't notice. Yet he did, and wasn't amused. Turning sharply, he nearly brushed her with his saber before walking off, bringing the photo line to a halt because of one tourist's thoughtless impulse. Pushing a tourist. At the gates of Buckingham Palace, a royal guard was in conversation with a mounted knight stationed at the main entrance. Despite their duty, a few tourists approached, eager to snap pictures and disregarding the risks of standing too close to the horse, a powerful animal that could have reacted unpredictably. But one tourist took it even further. Without permission, he stepped right between the two guards to capture his perfect shot and even reached toward the horse's reins, a move that royal guards have no tolerance for. The guards immediately ordered him to step back, but he ignored the warning, leading to the inevitable. Fed up, the royal guard gave him a firm push, asking if he had a problem. Perhaps it was a language barrier, or maybe the tourist simply didn't understand the guard's orders. Either way, it's a good reminder to learn a bit about local customs, or hire a guide, before you end up making a fool of yourself. Crossing the line. During a choreographed event by the British Royal Guard, tourists inside Buckingham Palace's gardens were instructed to stay behind a white line marked on the ground. Yet, many disregarded this rule. Some stood with their toes right on the line, while others boldly stepped over it, ignoring the boundary entirely. But they were about to learn why that line was there. As the horses began to approach, the tourists quickly realized the purpose of the restriction. Their behavior shifted instantly when the powerful animals drew near, forcing them to respect the boundary, whether they liked it or not. The tough tourist. It's well known that the Royal Guard's horses can be unpredictable, yet some tourists still insist on getting dangerously close, putting their entire group at risk. One particularly brazen tourist took things even further. Despite her boldness, it didn't excuse her disrespect. As the horse moved curiously toward her, perhaps drawn by the food she had in her pocket, she was already standing too close, nearly touching its reins. When the horse approached, she astonishingly slapped it, attempting to push it away. Instead of stepping back, she stayed right there, repeating her actions when the horse approached again. By the third push, the knight had seen enough. The guard likely noticed her behavior, but might have expected her to snap a quick photo and move on. Unfortunately, she lacked the common sense to back off, forcing the guard to firmly step in and make it clear that it was time for her to leave. Talking back to the guard. On a particularly hectic day outside Buckingham Palace, the royal guards were on high alert amidst blaring ambulance sirens, crowds of tourists, and restless horses. Yet, the tourists seemed oblivious to the tension, focused only on snapping photos with the guards and treating them like mere attractions. Things took a turn when a woman approached a mounted guard for a photo, ignoring his request to step back. He then gestured to the man with her, repeating the order for him to move away. But instead of complying, the man talked back, asking what would happen if he didn't listen. Thankfully, the situation didn't escalate, though his defiance didn't go unnoticed. While the guard brushed off the rude comment, a nearby soldier sensed the confrontation and approached, ready to step in. By then, however, the couple had already moved on. Just as the saying goes, a barking dog rarely bites, yelling at a tourist. The routine for royal guards is demanding, especially when Buckingham Palace is teeming with tourists. One guard found himself struggling to move through his designated area due to the crowding. After stamping his boots to signal his presence, he addressed a knight nearby, then had to shout at a group blocking his path to reach a second knight. After confirming all was well with the second guard, he once again had to raise his voice as yet another group obstructed his way. But the breaking point came when he returned to the palace gardens and heard tourists giggling behind him. One woman, phone in hand, was filming him while unknowingly stepping into a restricted area. The guard turned sharply and shouted, ordering her to leave immediately. She laughed, possibly thinking he was overreacting, until she found herself face to face with a military officer, realizing the gravity of her mistake. Tourist got arrested. A tourist, likely a content creator trying too hard to be funny, was blatantly disrespecting a royal guard while disrupting the other tourists who were patiently waiting to take souvenir photos with the horse guard. He obnoxiously pretended to interview the guard, asking absurd questions and holding a lapel mic inches from the guard's face, fully aware that guards aren't allowed to respond. Eventually, the waiting tourists grew frustrated and told him to stop, but he ignored them, oblivious to the chaos he was causing. Things escalated quickly when he began arguing and nearly got into a fist fight. That was the final straw. The military police stepped in, and the creator soon found himself enjoying a bit of quiet time in a jail cell. Fighting with the cop. Unfortunately, fools are everywhere, but this guy seemed determined to rank high in both arrogance and ignorance. He arrived at the scene acting as if he owned the place, casually petting the Royal Guard's horse despite the obvious signs that no one else was doing the same. Naturally, a police officer stepped in, instructing him to back off, but that only fueled his antics. Offended by the officer's command, he ignored him and tried to snap a selfie with the horse, which, incidentally, was about to leave. Instead of moving on, he took the horse's departure as a personal insult, sparking conflict with other tourists. He started arguing with the cops and a nearby tourist, pretending to walk away but only getting louder with each step. The further he backed off, the more aggressive his insults became, even calling the officers bullies and taunting them over their toy guns. Meanwhile, the officers stood by, letting him dig his own grave of embarrassment until he finally slunk away into the crowd. So guys, what do you think about these idiots? Are they brave or just plain foolish? Well, let us know what you think in the comments below. And as we always say, if you find this video interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content just like this.